Hello everybody, this is Manues and welcome to another Eternal Contenders video series. Today I got something particularly sweet and interesting for you. It's a Tavrod based Reanimator deck built around Tavrod, Vara and Grasping at Shadows, and this deck has been given to me by a friend and long-time competitive card game master Hans-Joachim Hoeh, aka Hoeh, or in online games usually DrHoeh, because he happens to also be a doctor of philosophy. So for anyone that know him, I don't need to say much. For anyone that don't know him, he has basically for a fair share of his life made a living just by playing competitive card games. He has been one of the best players in the world in the WoW TCG, in Versus System TCG, in the Spoils TCG, and also made worlds of I think the first Soulforge worlds. Among others, he also has been a Pro Tour level player with some success at GP level in Magic before all these other games that he succeeded in, and eventually came back to play some more Magic in the last couple of years and doing coverage and stuff like that for the European Open Series and so on. So yeah, he still got some in him, and he took a chance on Eternal, played a bunch, and tried to come up with a good constructed deck, and he came up with the core, the skeleton for this deck, and was kind enough to share it with me and allow me to also record it as a video after I tested it some more, so that's pretty sweet. Okay, enough introduction. Let's take a look at the deck. So the deck is basically Argenport. It has a very light splash of Primal for like a few top-end units to make the whole reanimation plan a bit more diverse and powerful. So let's take a look at the unit core of the, the core of the deck first. The unit core of the deck first. We have 4 Sporefolk, 4 Bailiff, 4 Enforcer, 4 Steward, 4 Tavrod, 2 Harbinger, 2 Snowcrush Animist, and 4 Vara. The core of the deck, according to him, from what he gave me, was basically 4 Seek Power, 4 Sporefolk, 4 Bailiff, 4 Privilege of Rank, 3 Runehammer, 4 Steward, 4 Grasping at Shadows, 4 Harsh Roll, 4 Tavrod, 2 Harbinger, 1 Gift, 2 to 3 Animist, 4 Vara, and also 1 Dark Return. The Dark Return I wasn't convinced about. He basically had the Dark Return because he found like more was just too lackluster and situational, and also hurt you more against opposing Void Held, especially Steward of the Past or Silences in general. But he said he found it necessary to reliably play enough Varas in the late game in grindy matchups to basically play Vara often enough. But I found that not to be the case, and also found that the late game matchups that I had the most problems against, like Chalice for example, so far, Gift is just a much more powerful card against most late game decks than having another Vara, because that usually didn't help me win those games. Gift won me those games, so I found like 1 Gift to be a bit random and unreliable, and 2 Gift is just a number that I really liked lately in these more late game oriented shadow decks, to give you a reasonable chance to have one around turn 7 or 8. So that's one of the changes I made. And then he had like a couple of flex slots, like 3 to 5 flex slots I think, and I tried the one Herald song that he had for quite some time. It was pretty nice, and it like does a couple nice things. It lets you draw a card for free with Privilege Rank, discarding Privilege of Rank, and even saving the 3 power, in addition to just milling it with Sporefolk or Tavrod. It also lets you cycle excess power and makes it more likely to have a target for Grasping at Shadows on turn 5 by simply discarding like a Vara or an Animist or like a Harbinger, if that's worth it to put them into play earlier. Mostly the 8 drops though. I tried 2 Herald Song. That definitely felt too many. 1 felt nice, but the problem is like I had some problems that I wanted to solve, and Herald Song didn't solve any and just kind of was a nice thing to have, but nothing that seemed essential to the deck. So it was something that I was willing to give up on. And then I tried some removal stuff, like I tried a couple of Slays. They were okay, but not that great. Like the deck really just doesn't care that much about most random units. You kind of just stall out reasonably well, have some answers for smaller units with Runehammer and Bailiff, and against the like slower decks, Harsh Rule is just fast enough usually to reset the board when the board gets too scary. And then you also have Gift to make sure they only have so many threats they can drop, and the combination of Harsh Rule and Gift is particularly powerful against lower mid-range decks. And also simply the Vara late game, either turn 5 to 8 Vara, depending on where you get it, which grasping at Shadows or hard casting it on 8, is usually just so good. And the removal just doesn't really synergize with most of what you're doing, and you simply rarely lose to units if they are not very aggressive, and against aggressive decks Slay is not very good anyway. But yeah, Slay was okay. The problem that I basically rather had is that I wanted to be more consistent against aggro, especially Skycrack. Skycrack was the aggro deck that was causing problems. The other aggro decks seemed fine. And I also had trouble with Flyers. And that's why I wanted to try Enforcer, because Enforcer is still like pretty good against aggro, and it's really nice against Skycrack. One of the problems was having enough ways to deal with their Aegis and their units at the same time. Enforcer is a pretty solid blocker against aggro, and pops Aegises or silences Champion of Fury, stuff like that, or can silence a Vadius after the Aegis has been popped with like Bailiff and stuff like that. It just seemed like a nice thing to have that is quite good against aggro while not being bad or dead anywhere else. It's just a very solid generic card. It still answers the problematic units, because the problematic units against slower decks are usually not the ones with the most stats. A lot of the time they are the utility units, and silencing takes away the utility, and then you have all the time in the world and are fine. So it seemed like a really nice, well-rounded answer that gave the deck something proactive to do, something universally applicable to do, and something that also does more than Slay against aggro, basically. And so far I like this the most. I mean, I can still see going back to like 3 Slay and a Herald Song, for example, if you really want to. I haven't played a ton with the Enforcer. I think I played like 20-30 games with the Enforcers or something, and they played pretty well and felt pretty good so far. It's definitely what I like the most, but yeah, it's not 100% final. I mean, I outlined the core of the deck before. To be fair, I disagree that 3 Hammer is core. I think you really want 4 Hammer as core. Hammer is so good, especially with Tavrod, and Tavrod already has limited hits, and hitting Hammer with Tavrod is just so brutally good. That's like another way of dealing with like bigger units. If they have too many, you sometimes just Runehammer them with the Tavrod Runehammer. Alright, so let's talk about the other units real quick. Sporefolk is just solid. It's like trades with early aggro units, blocks random 1/1s, builds privilege of rank to draw you 2 power for free, which is super powerful, and a good way to get out of like hands that have 2 to 3 power that you redrew into, for example, and then hitting a privilege gets you out of all that. And in general, privilege makes this deck so good at reliably hitting 7 and 8 power on curve. That is amazing. Like the deck drops 7 to 8 power on curve really, really well to really make sure that you actually have that Vara on turn 8 and not later. It has been really great for that. And then we have, and of course it also mills potential targets for Vara or Grasping at Shadows. Then we have Copperhall Bailiff. It's a hit for Tavrod, which is important. It's great against aggressive decks at slowing them down and buying you time, either to Harsh Rule or to deploy more blockers, and also makes your blockers better. And yeah, the Warcry actually makes it pretty decent against more reactive decks, because at 2 attack it is a decent clock, and the Warcry matters quite a bunch. Getting Warcries on Enforcers, Runehammers, Stewards, or even Tavrods and Harbingers is quite nice. Doesn't matter as much on the high drops, but it's still decent. Like, Warcry is a Warcry, why not? And getting Warcries on Sporefolk actually turns it from barely relevant into a decent body as well. So the Warcries are actually pretty sweet, and the Warcry target density of the deck is quite high too. Enforcer I already explained at length. Steward of the Past, just a great defensive utility unit on 4. Blocks really well, shuts down a bunch of problematic cards. Especially before, when you didn't have Enforcer, Steward was very important at dealing with a bunch of problem cards like Dawnwalkers and such. So yeah, really good, suppresses a lot of void related stuff from the opponent and trades with anything basically. Really what the deck wants, and it's a shadow unit for Vara to either get back and trade with anything, or even trigger a Vara a turn later to get back something else. Tavrod, Tavrod doesn't need much explanation. A powerhouse, great offense, great defense, great synergy with Grasping at Shadows and Vara and Privilege of Rank, and Runehammer and Bailiff and other Tavrods. One of the core cards of the deck, and this might be as good or better of a Tavrod deck than Armory. Then we have 2 Harbingers. It might seem a bit weird to splash for that guy, but it's the only source of health gain in the deck, and also another way to stabilize against aggressive decks with a bunch of small units, because you might be able to stall them out a bit and slow them down with your early blockers and stuff. And Harbinger then like really takes over the board, makes it hard for them to come back or overwhelm you, and also is a way to just make sure to not get burned out in the later game. So even though they are a bit underwhelming at times, they have been proven to be worth it and necessary, and they're also a decent play on curve, and the deck only has 2 6-drops. The Animist is just a really nice Grasping at Shadow target on 5, can really turn a game around. It's a great thing to get back with Vara, can sometimes turn the game over like 2 or 3 turns, crystallize style even against decks with bigger units. It's just felt really nice. It is reasonable to consider if you cut the Enforcers to go back to 3 of those possibly. I'm just not 100% sure how good or important the third is, aside from clogging up your hand, and I think the second gift is probably better than the third Animist, so that was kind of the swap that I made. And yeah, then we have the 4 Varas that are kind of the heart of the deck, and is really where the winning happens. Then we have a bunch of spells, Seek, Power, and Privilege. Fix your colors and your power drops really well. Hold the deck together. Runehammer is just a great flexible answer and threat that also works great with Tavrod. Grasping at Shadows is more Varas, is earlier Varas, is early Snow Crash Animist, or at worst it's more Tavrods, which is also pretty good. And even sometimes you get back like a Copperhall Bailiff or an Enforcer if you need the utility. I have grasped back Enforcers to silence critical units that I had a problem with that I couldn't deal with otherwise before, so that is a nice interaction to keep in mind. And the 2 gift against slower decks to just sort of win the game, because they sometimes can deal reasonably well with some amount of Vara action, especially if they have like Steward of the Past. Just to keep in mind, Steward of the Past is not as good against this deck as people would think. Like, you would think, oh, if there's a lot of Stewards, the deck is bad and all. That's not true. Like, you just have to be a bit careful how you mill yourself. Like, you don't want to play your Sporefolk aggressively against opposing Stewards, like against Feln. Just don't play it on turn 2. And the deck has ways to deal with Steward, like silencing it with Enforcer. That's another thing where Enforcer comes in handy. Or killing it with Harsh Rule, or killing it with Animist, and then you can just Vara afterwards. You just have to make sure that that you don't give the Steward too much value, and then you just kill the Steward and afterwards do your Vara thing. The deck is good enough even without the void interactions, and also with doing various things afterwards, like even getting back like a 5/7 silence Tavrod is still very decent. So Steward is not the end of the world. Just play a bit with it in mind and you're fine. Then we have the power base. It's very shadow-centric, because we need a lot of Justice Sigils for privilege. 7 Justice Sigils is usually fine for the 4 privilege. Sure, sometimes it happens that you play like a 3rd privilege and it doesn't find 3rd or 4th privilege due to milling yourself so much, and the last one doesn't find any or only 1, but that's not a big deal. At that point you have so much power that it doesn't matter. 1 primal sigil only, because we only have 2 double primal cards, and they are 8 drops, and half the time we're not even gonna play them other than with Grasping at Shadows and Vara. And we also have 9 primal duels to hit one that way and then just tutor for the other one. And same with the shadow sigils. We have so many other shadow sources that 2 shadow sigils is fine, because we only have 6 cards that cost triple shadow. They are super high curve, and 4 of them we might even reanimate at times. So it's better to play more duels than more sigils to make the power base as consistent as possible. So yeah, the deck has been doing pretty well. I basically had trouble against like Armory, Chalice, and Skycrack so far, and other than that the deck felt really great. Like Stone Scar based aggro decks, for example, have been going pretty well. Time mid-range decks are almost a joke. The matchup is really, really powerful. They are not powerful and not aggressive enough usually to keep up with what this deck is doing, and Feln also has been feeling really well, really good. So all in all, the deck is really nice. It's also very powerful, has a bunch of nut draw potential, and can just kind of crush anything with the right draws, and depending on what they are doing, even the like more problematic matchups. So yeah, this deck has a lot of potential, and it's like the first good Reanimator list that I've seen or tried. I mean, I experimented myself a bunch with Reanimator type strategies before. They all kind of felt like too fragile and inconsistent and slow, and this is just a really, really nice approach. So chapeau to Hoeh for that. He came up with like a really, really smooth and well and elegantly designed core for Reanimator deck that is resilient enough to not just kind of suck when there's Steward of the Past on the other side of the table. So yeah, give the deck a try. It's pretty awesome. Been doing pretty well for me. It's one of the decks. It's the deck that got me from like rank 100-ish into like the top 20 towards the end of last season, even though I unfortunately dropped out again with some other decks the day after, like on the last day of the season, which once again made me end up outside of top 100, but ladder is quite swingy these days. So if you really want to like finish high, it makes sense to just kind of sit on the rating a bit more on the last days. But that's not what I'm here for. I'm here for brewing and testing and bringing you guys new ideas, new deck techs. So that's the cost of it sometimes. Alright, as usual, gonna hop into some games. Keep the new format in mind. If you want to watch it in one piece, just like with the old videos in a way, just make sure to not watch it through the subscription page on YouTube. Just watch it through the playlist on the channel page, or that I posted on my social media that you can find down here. And yeah, 6 games coming up to show you guys the deck in action, and stay tuned for the first game coming up in a moment.